The line at the post office had not moved in 11 minutes, and Julian Hart had exactly 19 minutes left before the call. That would decide whether his company survived the year. He stood, sixth in a line of 9 people inside a cramped downtown branch that smelled like cardboard and cold coffee, phone gripped so tight his knuckles had gone pale, watching an elderly woman at the counter carefully counting out exact change for 4 stamps, while the clerk waited with visible patience that Julian did not share. He had 11 minutes until the lawsuit briefing. He had a company worth $200 million balanced on a single piece of paper that might not exist. And he had a woman in a cardigan the color of weak tea taking what felt like a geological age to lick an envelope shut. That was the stake, laid bare before anyone had said a word. Corvus Systems, the company Julian had built from a 2-person garage lab into one of the fastest-growing sensor technology firms on the West Coast, was 72 hours from a courtroom date that could end it. A larger competitor was claiming Corvus had stolen the foundational architecture behind its core product, a claim that, if it held, would not just cost Julian money. It would cost him the company itself, the patent, the name, 8 years of 19-hour days. His lawyers needed one thing before Thursday: proof the underlying concept had existed publicly before Corvus filed, proof it belonged to no one, proof that would collapse the entire case in a single afternoon. They had found nothing. Julian was starting to understand what losing actually felt like, a sensation he had spent his whole adult life engineering his way around. The woman at the counter was Eleanor Whitfield, 81 years old, silver hair pinned back neatly, reading glasses on a beaded chain resting against a hand-knit cardigan. She came to this branch every Thursday morning at exactly 9:15, rain or shine, to mail 4 letters, 1 to each of her grandchildren, because none of them called anymore, and she had decided 3 years ago that if the phone would not ring, she would simply write instead. She always paid in exact change, counted twice, because her late husband had taught her that a person who wastes a cashier's time when they don't have to isn't really in a hurry. They're just not thinking about anyone but themselves. Julian checked his phone again. 9:17. "Ma'am," he said, louder than he meant to, "is there any way you could hurry this along? Some of us have actual places to be." The branch went quiet in the particular way small rooms go quiet when someone has said something everyone heard and nobody wanted to. Eleanor did not turn around immediately. When she did, there was no anger in her face, only the calm, assessing look of a woman who had spent 31 years teaching 7th grade science and had faced down worse than an impatient man in an expensive jacket. "I'll be one more moment," she said. "I imagine your places will still be there. Before we continue, if you believe that patience has no age limit and dismissiveness never wins in the end, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today." Julian exhaled hard through his nose and looked away, and that was when his phone rang, the call he had been dreading arriving 4 minutes early. His lead attorney's voice was clipped and grim. They had exhausted the archive search. Nothing predated the filing. Without prior public disclosure of the architecture, Corvus had no defense left but a jury's sympathy, and juries rarely sympathized with the company holding $200 million in venture funding. Julian said nothing for a long moment, staring at the back of Eleanor's cardigan while his entire company quietly ended in his ear. "There has to be something," he said, more to himself than to his lawyer. "Some paper? Some old journal? Something?" Eleanor, still standing at the counter finishing her transaction, spoke without turning around again. "Sensor architecture," she said. "Piezoelectric layering, self-calibrating array. Am I close?" Julian lowered the phone slowly. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I published it," Eleanor said. "In 1974, in a journal nobody reads anymore, under a name nobody uses anymore. Before I decided teaching 13-year-olds mattered more to me than fighting a patent office that didn't take women engineers seriously enough to renew my funding." The room, which had gone quiet once already for the wrong reason, went quiet again for an entirely different one. Julian asked her to sit with him, not as an order, not as a man accustomed to people rearranging their schedules around his, but carefully, The way a person asks something when they finally understand they have been standing next to the answer the entire time. They sat together at a small table near the branch's front window, while his 19 minutes became 40, then an hour, because some things he was beginning to understand mattered more than a call he could reschedule. Eleanor told him about the lab she had worked in outside Pittsburgh in the early 70s. One of 2 women among 31 engineers, how she had designed a self-calibrating sensor array as part of a Navy contract that was quietly shelved. How she had published the underlying architecture in an obscure materials science journal before the shelving so the work would not simply vanish, and how, 6 months later, her funding had been cut and she had been told, not unkindly but not kindly either, that the department felt her talents might be better suited elsewhere. She had gone into teaching because a school 2 towns over needed a science teacher and did not ask whether she minded not being taken seriously anymore, only whether she could explain photosynthesis to 12-year-olds in a way that made them care. She had done that for 31 years. She had never once mentioned the sensor array to anyone, because for 5 decades nobody had asked, and she had made a private peace with being the kind of person whose real work lived quietly in a drawer instead of a boardroom. She still had her copy of the journal. She still had her original lab notebook, the one with the hand-drawn diagrams and the calculations in pencil that had gone soft and gray with age, kept in a shoebox in her hall closet beside her husband's old watch, because some things a person keeps without knowing exactly why until the day they finally matter again. Julian's legal team verified the journal publication within 6 hours. It predated the competitor's filing by decades. It was, in the driest possible legal language, dispositive. The lawsuit collapsed within the week, not with a dramatic verdict, but with a quiet withdrawal, the kind of ending real cases actually have. And Julian understood, standing in his own office afterward, that the woman he had snapped at in a post office line had just handed him back 8 years of his life without asking for anything in return. He did not offer her money, not at first because he understood, watching her describe that lab with more pride than bitterness, that money was not the wound. He asked her instead what she wanted, and she told him the truth. She wanted her name on it, not payment. Recognition, 50 years overdue, that Eleanor Whitfield had built something real before anyone decided her work didn't count. Corvus Systems filed an amended patent history within the month, formally crediting Eleanor Whitfield's 1974 research as foundational prior art, publicly, permanently, in a document that would outlive both of them. Julian endowed a scholarship in her name at the engineering school that had once cut her funding for young women in materials science, funded not as a tax write-off, but because he had asked Eleanor what would have helped her most at 26, and she had answered without hesitation, someone believing her the first time. Eleanor still comes to the post office every Thursday at 9:15. She still writes to her grandchildren, though 2 of them call now, having heard the story from a cousin who saw it on the news. She still pays in exact change, counted twice, because that had never been about the money either. Julian waits behind her sometimes, when his schedule allows it, and he never once checks his phone while he does. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments, whose quiet, uncredited work do you think deserves to finally be seen?